Some wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trusted the most. And while many people can move on with fake smiles and empty words, empaths carry pain differently. They feel everything deeply. They remember the tone, the silence, the betrayal, the moment their kindness was taken for weakness. And that is why there are certain things an empath never truly forgives. An empath can forgive mistakes. They can forgive harsh words spoken in anger. They can forgive distance, misunderstandings, and even rejection. But there is one thing that cuts deeper than all of it: intentional betrayal. When someone knowingly breaks the heart of an empath, manipulates their emotions, or abuses their trust, something changes forever, because empaths love with purity. They give without calculating. They stay when everyone else leaves. They listen when nobody else cares. They notice pain hidden behind smiles. They sacrifice their own peace just to make others feel safe. And when that kind of soul gets betrayed, the pain is not temporary. It becomes a lesson carved into their spirit. Empaths experience betrayal in a way that most people will never fully understand. For them, emotional pain is not something shallow or temporary. It reaches deep into the heart because empaths invest themselves sincerely in the people they care about. They listen carefully, support endlessly, and love with complete honesty. That is why betrayal affects them so intensely. It is not only about what happened, it is about the trust that was destroyed. An empath remembers the feeling behind every action. They remember the moment they realized someone was pretending, manipulating, or taking advantage of their kindness. While others may move on quickly, an empath replays the emotional impact over and over again. The hardest part for an empath is that they usually see the good in people even when the warning signs are obvious. They ignore red flags because they believe everyone deserves understanding and compassion. They convince themselves that people can change. They stay loyal long after they should walk away. But when betrayal finally becomes undeniable, the emotional damage cuts deeply because they realize they gave genuine love to someone who did not value it. Empaths do not fear being alone. What hurts them most is discovering that someone they trusted was never emotionally genuine. They feel disappointed not only in the other person, but also in themselves. They begin questioning their judgment. They wonder why they ignored the signs. They ask themselves why they tolerated disrespect for so long. This emotional self-reflection can become exhausting because empaths naturally analyze every interaction and every emotion connected to the relationship. What makes betrayal even more painful for empaths is their emotional memory. They remember tones of voice, cold behavior, broken promises, and moments when their intuition warned them something was wrong. Even after the relationship ends, the emotional experience stays inside them. This does not mean empaths are weak. In reality, it shows how deeply they connect with people. Their hearts are built for meaningful emotional bonds, not surface-level connections. However, betrayal eventually teaches empaths an important lesson about emotional intelligence and self-protection. They begin realizing that kindness should never come at the cost of self-respect. They learn that constantly forgiving toxic behavior only encourages more emotional damage. Slowly, they stop over-explaining themselves. They stop begging for honesty and effort. Instead, they start protecting their peace. An empath who has experienced betrayal becomes more aware of emotional manipulation. They begin noticing patterns instead of excuses. They understand that actions reveal character more than words ever will. This awareness transforms them. They may still remain compassionate, but they become more selective about who receives access to their heart. One of the strongest moments in an empath's life is when they finally choose themselves over toxic attachment. That decision changes everything. They stop trying to save people who repeatedly hurt them. They stop sacrificing their emotional health just to maintain relationships that drain them. Instead, they focus on healing, growth, and emotional balance. Betrayal may deeply wound an empath, but it also awakens wisdom inside them. Over time, they become emotionally stronger, more self-aware, and harder to manipulate. They no longer confuse loyalty with self-destruction. And once they learn this lesson, they never allow the same type of pain to control them again. Kindness is one of the rarest qualities in today's world, yet it is often misunderstood and taken for granted. Empaths are usually the people who give the most without expecting anything in return. They offer emotional support, patience, understanding, and compassion even when they themselves are struggling. They try to make people feel heard, valued, and safe. But sadly, many people mistake this kindness for weakness. They assume that because an empath is gentle, they can be manipulated, ignored, or emotionally used without consequences. Empaths naturally avoid conflict. They try to understand everyone's pain and often excuse toxic behavior because they believe there is good hidden inside people. This is why selfish individuals are drawn toward them. Manipulative people recognize emotional softness and see it as an opportunity. They take advantage of the empath's forgiving nature. They rely on the fact that the empath will keep giving chances, keep understanding, and keep staying loyal even after repeated disappointment. But kindness should never be confused with lack of strength. An empath may stay silent for a long time, but silence does not mean they are unaware. In fact, empaths notice everything. They notice changes in energy, inconsistency in behavior, fake intentions, and emotional dishonesty. They simply choose patience over confrontation because they hope situations will improve. Unfortunately, toxic people interpret this patience as weakness. They believe the empath will never leave. This misunderstanding creates emotional imbalance in relationships. The empath becomes the one constantly giving while the other person keeps taking. The empath sacrifices their emotional energy trying to maintain peace, while the toxic individual becomes comfortable with selfish behavior. Over time, this emotional imbalance drains the empath completely. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming kind-hearted individuals have no limits. Every empath has an emotional breaking point. The difference is that empaths tolerate pain quietly for much longer than most people. They carry emotional stress internally. They forgive repeatedly because they want harmony, not division. But eventually, even the purest heart becomes exhausted, and when an empath finally reaches that point, everything changes. The person who once gave endless attention suddenly becomes distant. The person who once fought to keep the relationship alive stops trying completely. This shift surprises people because they are used to the empath always being available. But what they fail to understand is that empaths do not leave impulsively. By the time they walk away emotionally, they have already endured more pain than anyone realized. True emotional intelligence teaches empaths that protecting their peace is not selfish, it is necessary. They begin understanding that constantly tolerating disrespect only damages their mental and emotional well-being. They realize that being compassionate does not mean accepting toxic treatment. This lesson transforms them into stronger individuals. They stop overgiving. They stop explaining their worth to people who refuse to appreciate it. They become more selective about relationships and more aware of emotional manipulation. Their kindness remains, but now it comes with boundaries. Healthy kindness includes self-respect. Real compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Empaths eventually learn that saying no is not cruelty. Walking away from toxic people is not weakness. Choosing peace over chaos is not selfishness. And once they understand this truth, they stop allowing others to misuse their heart. Their softness remains, but now it is protected by wisdom, emotional awareness, and the courage to walk away from anything that destroys their inner peace. Emotional exhaustion is one of the most painful experiences an empath can go through because it does not happen suddenly. It builds slowly over time through disappointment, betrayal, emotional neglect, and constant overgiving. Empaths are naturally caring people who invest deeply into relationships. They try to help, heal, and support others even when their own hearts are tired. They absorb the emotions of the people around them and often carry burdens that do not even belong to them. But eventually, there comes a moment when the emotional weight becomes too heavy to carry. At first, an empath keeps trying harder. They communicate more, forgive more, and sacrifice more. They believe effort can fix emotional distance. They believe love and patience can heal broken relationships. So they continue giving their time, energy, and emotional support even when they receive very little in return. But the constant imbalance slowly drains them from the inside. Emotional exhaustion changes an empath in ways most people never notice immediately. The bright energy they once carried begins fading. They become quieter, less expressive, and emotionally withdrawn, not because they no longer care, but because they are mentally tired of carrying relationships alone. They stop explaining their feelings repeatedly because they realize they are speaking to people who only listen when it benefits them. One of the saddest parts about emotional exhaustion is that empaths usually suffer silently. They hide their pain behind calm behavior. They continue smiling while internally feeling overwhelmed. Since they are used to being the strong one for everyone else, they struggle to ask for support themselves. They fear becoming a burden. So instead of expressing their emotional pain openly, they suppress it until they reach a breaking point. When an empath becomes emotionally exhausted, their perspective changes completely. They begin noticing how often their kindness has been taken for granted. They start recognizing patterns of manipulation, inconsistency, and emotional selfishness. Suddenly, excuses no longer sound convincing. Empty promises lose their power. The empath finally sees the relationship for what it truly is, instead of what they hoped it could become. This realization creates emotional detachment. The empath who once chased connection now chooses silence. The person who once fought for the relationship becomes emotionally distant. This shift often shocks people because they are used to the empath always caring deeply and always returning after conflict. But emotional exhaustion changes priorities. The empath realizes that constantly sacrificing their mental peace for unhealthy relationships is destroying them internally. This is where emotional intelligence begins to grow stronger. The empath learns that protecting their emotional health is not selfish. They understand that boundaries are necessary for survival. They stop trying to rescue people who refuse to change. Instead of focusing all their energy on fixing others, they begin healing themselves. Emotional exhaustion also teaches empaths the difference between genuine love and emotional dependency. They realize that healthy relationships should not leave them feeling drained all the time. Real connection should bring peace, trust, and emotional safety instead of confusion and anxiety. Over time, the exhausted empath becomes wiser and more selective. They still care deeply, but they no longer give unlimited access to their heart. They become careful about who they trust and where they invest their energy. Their compassion remains, but now it is balanced with self-respect. And although emotional exhaustion is painful, it often becomes the turning point that transforms an empath into someone emotionally stronger, calmer, and far more aware of their own value. Forgiveness is often misunderstood, especially by people who think it automatically means reconciliation. Many believe that if someone forgives you, they must allow you back into their life exactly as before. But emotionally intelligent people, especially empaths, eventually learn a powerful truth. Forgiveness does not always mean reconnection. You can release anger from your heart while still protecting yourself from the person who caused the pain. Empaths naturally want peace. They dislike conflict and emotional tension. Because of this, they often forgive people quickly. They try to understand why someone acted a certain way. They look for hidden pain behind harmful behavior. They convince themselves that everyone deserves another chance. But repeated betrayal teaches them that forgiveness without boundaries can become self-destruction. There is a difference between healing and reopening old wounds. An empath may forgive someone internally because they no longer want to carry hatred or emotional heaviness. They may genuinely wish peace for the other person. But that does not mean trust magically returns. Trust is built through consistency, honesty, and respect. Once trust has been broken repeatedly, emotional intelligence teaches that keeping distance is sometimes the healthiest decision. Many toxic people confuse forgiveness with weakness. They expect unlimited access after causing emotional damage. They believe apologies alone should erase manipulation, lies, or disrespect. But emotionally mature people understand that words mean nothing without changed behavior. A sincere apology is not proven by emotion. It is proven by actions over time. Empaths often struggle with guilt when they choose distance. Because they have compassionate hearts, they worry about hurting others even after being hurt themselves. They wonder if cutting ties makes them cold or selfish. But protecting your peace is not cruelty. Choosing emotional safety is not revenge. It is wisdom. One of the hardest lessons empaths learn is that not everyone who says sorry has truly changed. Some people apologize only because they fear losing access, not because they understand the pain they caused. Emotional intelligence allows empaths to recognize this difference. Instead of getting trapped in endless cycles of hurt and forgiveness, they begin valuing emotional stability over temporary emotional attachment. Forgiveness becomes healthier when it is connected to self-respect. An empath can let go of resentment without allowing toxic behavior back into their life. They can move forward emotionally while still maintaining strong boundaries. This is not bitterness, it is growth. Sometimes the strongest response is silence and distance. Not every situation requires confrontation. Not every betrayal deserves another conversation. Emotionally intelligent people understand that closure does not always come from explanations. Sometimes closure comes from accepting reality and choosing peace over chaos. Walking away quietly can be more powerful than continuing endless emotional battles. As empaths grow emotionally stronger, they stop trying to force relationships to work at any cost. They began understanding that love should not constantly hurt. Genuine relationships should feel safe, respectful, and emotionally balanced. If someone repeatedly destroys that balance, forgiveness may still happen internally, but reconnection no longer feels necessary. This mindset changes everything. The empath becomes calmer, wiser, and more emotionally protected. They stop reopening doors that only lead to pain. They stop believing potential matters more than patterns. Instead, they focus on relationships that bring honesty, trust, and mutual care. Forgiveness frees the heart from bitterness, but boundaries protect the soul from repeated damage. And once an empath truly understands this, they no longer confuse love with unlimited tolerance. There comes a point in every empath's life where they realize they can no longer continue sacrificing themselves just to keep others comfortable. For years, many empaths place other people's needs above their own. They become the listener, the helper, the emotional support system for everyone around them. They give their energy freely because caring deeply feels natural to them. But eventually, constant emotional giving without balance creates exhaustion, sadness, and emotional emptiness. That is when an empath begins to understand the true importance of self-respect. Self-respect changes everything. An empath who once tolerated disrespect starts noticing how unhealthy certain relationships truly are. They begin realizing that being kind does not mean accepting emotional abuse, manipulation, or neglect. They understand that love should not constantly require suffering. This realization becomes the beginning of emotional growth and inner transformation. For a long time, empaths often confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice. They stay in situations that damage them because they fear hurting others or being misunderstood. They keep forgiving people who continue repeating the same harmful behavior. They believe patience and compassion can heal every relationship. But emotional intelligence eventually teaches them a difficult truth. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your heart. When self-respect becomes a priority, the empath starts setting boundaries. At first, this feels uncomfortable because they are used to overgiving. Saying no feels strange. Taking space feels selfish. Protecting their energy feels unfamiliar. But with time, they realize boundaries are necessary for emotional survival. Without them, toxic people will continue draining their peace and taking advantage of their kindness. One of the biggest signs of emotional maturity is when an empath stops chasing validation from people who consistently fail to appreciate them. They no longer beg for attention, effort, or honesty. Instead, they observe actions carefully. They stop believing empty promises and start paying attention to patterns. This awareness protects them from emotional manipulation. Self-respect also changes the way an empath handles relationships. They stop tolerating one-sided connections where they are always the giver. They begin understanding that healthy relationships require mutual effort, emotional safety, and respect. If someone only appears when they need support but disappears during difficult moments, the empath no longer ignores that imbalance. As self-respect grows, the empath becomes emotionally stronger and calmer. They stop over-explaining themselves to people determined to misunderstand them. They stop feeling responsible for fixing everyone's problems. Instead of carrying emotional burdens that belong to others, they focus on protecting their own mental and emotional health. This transformation often surprises people around them. Those who once benefited from the empath's endless patience may accuse them of becoming distant or cold. But the truth is different. The empath has simply learned the value of their peace. They finally understand that constantly abandoning themselves to save others only leads to emotional destruction. Choosing self-respect does not mean an empath stops caring. Their compassion still exists. Their kindness remains real. The difference is that they now recognize their own worth. They understand that love should never require losing yourself completely. An empath who prioritizes self-respect becomes difficult to manipulate because they no longer tolerate behavior that damages their inner peace. They become selective with their energy, careful with their trust, and intentional with their relationships. They learn that walking away from toxic environments is not weakness but wisdom. And once an empath truly understands this lesson, they stop settling for relationships that only survive through their suffering. Instead, they create a life built on peace, balance, emotional honesty, and genuine respect. Emotional intelligence is one of the most powerful strengths a person can develop because it changes the way someone understands emotions, relationships, pain, and personal growth. For empaths, emotional intelligence often develops through difficult experiences. Betrayal, disappointment, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion become painful lessons that eventually transform them into stronger and wiser individuals. What once hurt them deeply begins teaching them how to protect their peace, control their emotions, and recognize unhealthy behavior before it destroys them again. At first, many empaths struggle emotionally because they feel everything intensely. They absorb the emotions of others, overthink situations, and become emotionally attached very quickly. They want harmony in relationships, so they often ignore red flags and tolerate behavior that damages their mental well-being. They believe understanding someone's pain is enough to save the relationship. But emotional intelligence teaches them that understanding people does not mean accepting mistreatment from them. One of the biggest changes emotional intelligence creates is self-awareness. Empaths begin noticing their emotional patterns. They recognize how certain people drain their energy, create anxiety, or disturb their peace. Instead of blaming themselves for every failed relationship, they start understanding that not every problem was their responsibility to fix. This awareness becomes the foundation of emotional strength. Emotionally intelligent people also learn emotional control. This does not mean they stop feeling emotions. It means they stop allowing emotions to control their decisions. An empath may still feel hurt, disappointed, or betrayed, but instead of reacting impulsively, they become more thoughtful and calm. They learn the power of silence, patience, and observation. Rather than arguing endlessly with toxic people, they choose distance and peace. Another important lesson emotional intelligence teaches is the difference between empathy and emotional dependency. Empaths often lose themselves trying to heal others. They sacrifice their own happiness to maintain relationships that are unhealthy. But over time, they realize that constantly rescuing people who refuse to change only creates emotional suffering. Emotional intelligence helps them understand that love should feel balanced, respectful, and emotionally safe. As empaths grow stronger emotionally, they stop seeking validation from everyone around them. They no longer need constant reassurance to know their worth. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. Instead, they focus on maintaining inner peace and surrounding themselves with emotionally healthy individuals. Pain also changes the empath's perspective on trust. They become more careful about who they allow into their emotional space. This does not make them cold-hearted. It makes them wiser. Emotional intelligence teaches them that boundaries are necessary, not selfish. Protecting their energy becomes a form of self-respect. One of the strongest signs of emotional intelligence is learning when to let go. Emotionally mature empaths understand that not every relationship can be saved. Sometimes walking away is healthier than continuing to fight for people who continuously create pain. They stop forcing connections that only survive through emotional suffering. Over time, these experiences transform the empath completely. They become calmer under pressure, stronger during conflict, and more aware of emotional manipulation. They trust their intuition more and stop ignoring warning signs. Their kindness remains, but now it is guided by wisdom instead of blind emotional attachment. Emotional intelligence does not remove pain from life, but it teaches people how to survive pain without losing themselves. And for empaths, this growth becomes their greatest strength because the same heart that once broke easily eventually learns how to protect itself while still remaining compassionate, genuine, and emotionally powerful.